So while we are technical stuff is preparing the presentation of Carisa, just a few introductory words. The presence of Carisa was motivated by the book that Javier and I started editing last April. We planned to have a sections on the people that did pioneer work on remote labs. And we sent some invitations, and among the invitations we sent, we had the pleasure to have the yes from Molly Shore and Carisa Carisa and Bohus. So they did respond to our invitation, and they sent their chapter, which we placed first in the book. So when we had this, and when we read the chapter, we said this is really a wonderful piece. So I and Javier talked and said we have to invite Molly to come here. So we invited Molly. Molly was not available. They said Carisa did part of the job and said bring Carisa. And so Carisa is with us. I'm very happy. And so we are now having her keynote as the first keynote of REV. I and Teresa were able to prepare this, so we have a few slides to start, and then I will pass the word to Carisa. She's the speaker, so it's her show time, not mine, or not Teresa's. So I just want to start with a few words about the person itself. So, Carisa had her bachelor's degree in computer science from the Porto State University in 1986. She had some awards as a student, and then she went into the industry, Tektronix, Sequent Incorporated, as a software engineer. She then joined a startup company called Solution Logic in '92, and by that same year she started her master program. She was the co-principal investigator for the NASA grant that founded second best to be in there. This was the project that provided the grant for the work that Carisa and Bohus did under the supervision of Molly Shore. But life went on, so she went to be the vice president of Solution Logic, which she joined earlier on. She founded the James Clerk Maxwell Control Engineering Talk Series, where she hosted 6 talks per year for 6 years. She then obtained her Master of Science Computer Science at Oregon State University, where I think the thesis was about the work of second best in there. And then she became the president of the Solution Logic company. She also had a prize here, now as the Fast 50 Deloitte technology. Yeah, so Deloitte is a kind of not consulting firm, it's an accounting firm. And then she sold the business to a competitor in 2004 by $10 million? More, okay. Okay, she stayed here to
We got out of debt, let's put it that way.
So she stayed for a year to ensure a successful transition, and she's now pursuing a career in statistics, and she's working for the Oregon Agricultural Statistical Service. So this is Carisa, and we'll have the pleasure to hear her talk, keynote in a few moments. The work done by Carisa, Molly, and Bohus, they were able to publish about their work in '96 at IEEE Transactions on Education. She refers this on her chapter because by that time there were no keywords to describe the remote labs. What were remote labs? Now, this particular work has been cited 292 times, according to Google Scholar, in July 1st. There are some other articles, like for instance the early articles in REV, that are not counted here because they were not published under IEEE. This is the first edition of REV that now is indexed by IEEE Explorer. So we'll be seeing this number increasing, hopefully. Now, I was able to find this piece of information, which is quite recent. And I think this is a major recognition of Molly Shaw's and Carisa and Bohus' work. This is an article that was published in May 30 at the volume 100 of Proceedings of IEEE. So, this is 100 of history of engineering education. This particular article or paper talks about 5 major shifts in 100 years of engineering education. The authors, under the 5th major shift, which is the influence of information, communication, and computational technologies on engineering education, on section H, remote laboratories, state. Remote laboratories, a method that can at least partially replace lab experimentation, was first developed by Actan et al. And this is your paper published in '96. So this is a recognition, not from our community, but I think from people that work at IEEE. So I found this piece of information really the cherry on the top of the cake. Perfect. So, okay, this is my bit.
So I'll sit over here. And I have 4 slides. That's cool.
Which one?
Oh.
3, 2, and 1.
All right. Oh.
1, 3.
I got it now.
Okay.
I got it. Buenos dias. I am so humbled to speak to you today. 17 years ago, I performed 5 demonstrations of a remote lab from different locations and called it a triumph. Today, there are remote labs on every continent and they are used regularly by many, many students. That is fabulous, and I am greatly humbled by so much hard work, and I should know. So it has been a real pleasure to read the contributions contained in the recently published books, Internet Accessible Remote Labs and Using Remote Labs in Education. And I was thrilled to find the announcement that you just announced. I'll be at the conference all week, and I look forward to hearing about all of your current work and directions. I will discuss my project conducted in the mid-1990s and focus on 3 issues that confronted me. I believe these issues still have relevance. So the first one, okay. So originally my biggest task was explaining my project. No one understood what I was trying to do. Second, so I'm going to tell you the 3 things I want to discuss. Second, I want to talk about the possibilities of advanced experiments not limited to the internet, such as experiments in space, underwater, and through other media. Finally, I will discuss one of my favorite parts of the remote experience, and that's collaboration. Collaboration presents many challenges in a remote setting besides the consequences of human nature. So, in preparation for this talk, I spent a day in my basement going through all of my research. And this, what you see here, is one of my earliest schematics. Up in the left-hand corner is the date, and you'll see that originally I called the project Being There. So, I had complete confidence that I was going to build a system that was going to be just as good as being there. It would be months later that I coined the phrase second best to being there in recognition that I was not going to achieve my goal. At about the same time I was while I was working on this project, I was in a graduate level philosophy class called the Philosophy of Intelligence. It was 3 long months of abstraction after abstraction after abstraction about what was human intelligence. My final paper was a compare and contrast of the human automata by René Descartes and John van Neumann. So René Descartes wrote the Treatise of Man in 1668, and John van Neumann wrote The Computer and the Brain in the mid-1950s as part of a lecture series. And what they did was abstract what human intelligence and how to recreate how a person thinks. So I had all this long practice of abstracting everything. So I carried this schematic with me everywhere. And I explained my ideas to anyone who would listen, just to get feedback and to get practice at understanding what it was I was trying to do. I made appointments with janitors of the buildings that had labs in them, with the technicians that ran the labs. I had many, many faculty visits with various disciplines, and I talked to many school administrators who were suspicious of what I was trying to do. And I also had appointments with university attorneys. What I was trying to do was abstract the lab experience. And as you can see, at the top half, I was abstracting what a student sees. And then is kind of behind the scenes abstraction of how to make it work. And then there was the actual physical lab. So there was kind of 3 parts that I was trying to explain to people. And everybody just kind of scratched their heads and looked at me and told me I couldn't do it. So I think that this exercise of abstracting what the goal is still important today. There are natural classifications according to discipline, such as electrical engineering experiments and physics experiments and so on. I think it is important to continue to abstract these experiences into their components. It's a practical exercise for the future. There may be other disciplines that will benefit from a different experimental setup than is usual in their field. Do not be tempted to just list the steps, but rather the abstraction and what it represents. In fact, I believe that we can define a curricula for remote labs, just remote lab education in and of itself. This idea is supported in the current literature, but is not yet defined. Ideas that I have are what elements can be lossy, such as video, what elements must have fidelity and why, loop timing and relationships to reaction times, general abstraction techniques, and the recognition of what is missing in the abstraction and why. Teaching remote work skills could produce new occupations and should not be overlooked as a discipline itself. As a subfield to this, there may be interesting applications for disabled individuals who could use remote labs with alternative controls or even the same controls. I think continuing to define and explain the abstraction of what is happening in the remote lab is useful. As another example of what I did to finally define what I was doing, I considered the sense of smell. When I walk into a lab and smell, what information do I get? I spent a couple of weeks exploring smell as an abstraction to try to distill the information of that particular sense. It was a dead end, of course, but it was important to me to examine every perception and see how far I could take that abstraction and what was the useful information. Next, let us take a moment to reflect on our emerging field, perhaps 20 years old, and it's based on the internet, approximately 40 years old. Okay. Okay, I know the internet is what makes all of our remote lab technology possible, but it is powerless in many environments because of distance or medium. For example, space, or the depths of water and earth. I examined a lot of research in other communication disciplines since that was the only research that was available. I was in a position to contemplate possibilities outside of the internet since the internet as we know it didn't exist. I still think it is a great concept to evaluate. Some examples are teaming up with the International Space Station or with companies working in deep water and earth. I feel like a movie operator changing reels. Okay. This is the deep water oil accident in the Gulf of Mexico. In the media coverage, I noticed a huge lack of knowledge, expertise, and equipment. Even though we are creating a new area based on the internet, we can also explore other areas where working remotely creates new levels of researchers and support communities. Let's look beyond the internet. So finally, we come to my favorite area of remote labs, and that is collaboration. Okay, all the images I got were free, so. Finally, we come to my, okay. All right, so giving objectives to the collaboration piece was especially difficult to quantify. There could be collaborative objectives to learn while under pressure conducting experiments. I'm sure many people here can remember being a student and being placed in a group with a laggard, what to do. Or someone with great ideas but is very shy, or the intellectual bully whose ideas were flawed. This exists in industry as well. We need to learn in an educational setting first to constructively disagree, to have reasoned debate, and include all relevant information at face value. So I have a story from one of my projects in industry to kind of point out how important collaboration and the freedom to collaborate and share information is. It was a hardware-software product, and there was maybe 30 people on the team. There was a hardware engineer who knew that we were violating a bus specification. But this fact did not come out until it was way too late. It was at product introduction. The project failed and the product had to be withdrawn. Now, it's easy to blame the engineer and say he had the responsibility to report this fact. But we also have to examine this whole situation and ask why the environment did not support his revelation. Science is not immune to politics, but we have the desire to rise above it and learn and teach. I believe educators, scientists, and researchers are in a unique position of leadership. We tackle tough problems with many differences of opinions. We can demonstrate to others how to solve problems in the midst of disagreements. Today we have a whole new generation of students who are very comfortable working with the semi-anonymity of the internet. It protects and it also gives a voice. I call the internet a great equalizer of the loud and the quiet. The internet allows a free exchange of ideas in different time zones and different skill sets. We still have to guard against hostile debate, but we have tools for that, and I think the moderated discussion is a very useful tool for that. I think, again, we are in a leadership position to define collaboration criteria of actually putting collaboration skills first, to be practiced while put under pressure of conducting an experiment. I have seen classes where students evaluate each other in terms of the collaboration. They're called peer reviews. So some might say that education is an experiment, which can yield different output from identical inputs. I want to bring up another teaching development, that of the contest or competition as a motivation to learn. Just this past year, I retook the calculus sequence because I'm preparing for some higher math. And the teacher would offer us t-shirts and caps for the best write-up of difficult problems from an exercise set. I have tens of t-shirts. I entered every contest because it's just a natural motivator to want to win a prize. And so I think it's a useful tool to motivate students. And then also, some of you may be familiar with the DNA sequencing that had stumped researchers for several years. They packaged it as a game and put it out to the public, and gamers solved the DNA sequence, a short sequence, in a matter of weeks. So it was very exciting to everyone to have this problem solved, all in the name of a game. We definitely need stock experiments to teach basic concepts. I would like to suggest turning the experiment inside out. Give students the tools and the objectives, and have them create the experiment or to prove or disprove. So just turn the whole thing around and have them figure out the experiment. Competition is a huge motivator and ensures that some collaboration will take place. It is perfect practice for real-world problems. So, to recap, I have shared some of the thinking that went into my project and some of the challenges I faced. Continuing the abstractions and definitions for future use we cannot anticipate, exploring other communications beyond the internet, and continuing to work for successful collaborations and skills. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, that's the easy part.
You want to sit there?
No. From the moment that we had Carisa accepting me to be present here, I asked some authors, the authors of our book to send questions to Carisa. So I'll propose this following methodology. We have now a session for questions that you can present to Carisa, and I will try to interweave one question from the audience, one question that I have received beforehand. Okay? So I'll start with the audience, so if any one of you wants to place a question to Carisa, please.
I brought my thesis in case anybody wanted to.
Any question? Good, we have the group prepared. So let me just go into here. Okay. First question from David Bohus from UTS in Australia. And the question is, research over the last 10 years has clearly shown that whilst some learning outcomes are better supported by hands-on, face-to-face proximal labs, it has also shown that some learning outcomes are achieved better through remote experience. In other words, remote and hands-on labs serve different purposes. What is your view of the assertion that the phrase second best to being there has overlooked this difference and effectively encouraged remote labs to be seen as a poor alternative and hence undermine consideration of remote labs as a useful educational tool?
Great question. So, the first thing is what I talked about as the abstraction. And in the literature, see, I have the benefit, I read both books. So the abstraction from what I saw in the current literature can help students focus on the actual skills that they're intended to learn. I think one paper talked about students would often mess up their wiring and would get all hung up on problem solving and debugging, whereas what they were supposed to learn, they ran out of time. So I think that it's important to learn the skills first and to be able to focus on that. And I think that abstraction is very useful. But I think in a lot of cases that, in other words, I think there's a tiered approach. What about simulation? I spent a lot of time looking at simulations because that was one of the research papers that were available was simulation. Well, a lot of people in industry run their ideas through a simulation first, just to catch the major boo-boos. And so I think that there can be a tiered approach to learning. So first would be reading your textbook and doing problems on paper. The next might be running simulations. Then next you might focus on running something remotely with that just focused on the actual skill that you're trying to learn. And then finally you need to be able to actually do it in real life. So eventually you're going to need to wire the board and make that part run too. So I think that it's all a spectrum of learning your skills and to be directed precisely to the skill that you need to be focusing on at that time. Is there a follow-up to that? I think it's great.
Happy? Any questions from the audience? No? Please.
Well, perhaps you know the name of Professor Wyman from the United States, who is prize winner, Nobel Prize winner. And just he supposed that nature sciences subject must be taught in a quite different manner, starting from experiments. Of course, remote experiments are really the gate, because you may use it in every form of teaching, in lectures, in seminars, in laboratory exercise. Now I am coming to the object. So first of all, you must return the style of teaching, because you must start with experiments, which is not a common approach, because in physics, for instance, what I am teaching is really the first subject theory, not the experiment, not just examining the real world phenomena. Now I am coming to my points. I have no problem with teaching physics with remote experiments, starting with my talks with remote experiments, and no problems. Students love it. But I started in chemistry. And you may find that in chemistry virtually no experiment exists. And when I started my PhD students and chemistry experiments in 2006, something like this, and in Bridgeport I reported about it, so we were successful, but not with the teachers of chemistry. They disliked it. And they just said that never remote experiments. Now I'm coming here with the same experiment, and I'm trying to explain what is absolutely necessary to do, just the chemical experiment is successful. What's your opinion about the differences in natural sciences and remote experiments?
Right, and I appreciate that question. So my first lab experiences were in biology labs. And that's what I used for my basis of abstraction. I also took physics and had physics labs. I think that change hurts. And so people have to learn how to shake it up. And that's why I really like the whole abstraction idea of what is it that you're trying to learn. I think in chemical experiments, I think simulations would also be useful with colors describing what is going on. So you first get kind of the wash of what the idea is. But I don't think that you can really totally replace every single experiment. I think that, again, it just takes a wide range of things. And I think that we are all reticent to change. And I think that, like I said, my first task was just explaining what I was trying to do and how difficult that task is. And when people are closed to new ideas, they push back. So back to the collaboration piece, we need to work together to push through those defenses, is what I'll call them. Everybody likes what they know. They want to do what they know. Why would they go into foreign territory if they don't need to? But if we work together and say, okay, why do you think that the chemical experiment cannot be abstracted to be long distance? Or you could also look at it as, why do you want to make it remote? What is the benefit to making it remote? So one of the things that we found, and I classified this in my thesis, is what are the types of experiments that lend themselves easily to the remote situation? And one of them is, to me, is one-of-a-kind situations. So I think it was in the preface of one of the books that said, hey, the simplest laboratory was when an apple fell and then somebody was able to concretely say what gravity was. It can be simple. An experiment can be very simple. So I don't think that you have to make everything remote. I think that there's a stair step to learning. And I think that the important part is to work with our colleagues and our students to push through what is really a mental barrier. They're just saying, no, I don't want to do that. And so why not find out why and what would be useful to them? And as you discuss it, like I discussed it with so many administrators, I had to discuss the ideas with lawyers. And they didn't care, and they all just want to say, no, you can't do this. And so I had to convince them why it was important to try. And, you know, obviously I won them over. So, does that, okay. Does that give you some ammo to work with your colleagues?
You see, the problem is the breaking the barriers. And
Yes.
very few people just devote to this activity just to, not to explain, but break the barriers, which are professional barriers, very strong barriers.
But if we work together, you know, I think we come up with a stronger product.
Okay, two questions from Castro. Alternative. What about the new tendencies on remote class and pedagogy implementation on the young students? Motivation and integration, developing a new path and orientation to attract future engineers.
Can you help me with this now? I don't totally understand. You mean doing things remotely is fun?
I think the main question, Manuel, you are here, you can explain on that.
It should be for fun or just for trying to attract and people more engaged in the day-to-day working that we have as students. Try to engage and try to be more day-to-day.
Okay, so
One should be sort of the gamification of the fun for work, and the other one should be try to be more visual or more day-to-day.
So how can we use remote experiments or use experiments in general to attract people to science? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's fun, you know. I mean, we used this old robot arm that was named Eric, and people just enjoyed it. And so what I did as part of our program is I had a child's toy that did music, and we programmed it to push on little keys that would make it sing a different song. And everybody loved it. A simple child's toy being run by a robot arm that nobody was using at a remote lab. People want to do it over and over and over because it's so attractive. And I think simulations have the same attractive point is like you can use colors to illustrate a point. So I think that by using something that's fun, like a game, to have people learn by accident, and they don't even know that they're actually learning something. You've already drawn them in with making the experiment attractive. So I'm all for it, and it doesn't have to be for young and future engineers. I think people enjoy it today. Like I said, we just had this child's toy that anybody could play in person. I'm sure they would never touch it, but oh, I can make a robot arm play it. You know, that was fun. So I agree. I think it's a great tool to teach and to draw people in. And I think that, like the current robotics, I think there's little toys that you put together and you can build robots. You know, they're expensive and they're fantastically popular.
The second question is you are a software engineer, so
Okay.
it's about the integration of new widgets that you range from tablets or smartphones to new software developed environments or applications that support this tendency of remote labs, opening the range of users and labs and instruments.
Right. So you're talking about all the handheld devices. Right. So that I think that's one of the attractive parts to the young people is they already know how to do it. They've got the gesture down. I worked with a professor that was working to define what they call visual programming languages, and a lot of that was 15 years ago as well, and a lot of those things are in use today by everyone. I mean, any kid knows how to operate all of the devices, so I think that not only are they open to new things, they'll try it out. They're not afraid to fail or do something wrong. Whereas I think older professionals don't want to make a mistake and appear foolish. And so I think that the younger engineers are used to trying something, it doesn't work, try something else, that doesn't work, and they'll continue on and on and on as if that was part of the game. So I think it's a very useful concept that we can all learn from.
Any more questions from the audience?
Is anybody ready?
I'm not trying.
What have they been saying about me?
Okay, so now a question from the house. Javier? Reading the two books, I can see that a wide range of remote labs are designed, implemented, and used by different universities. But also reading the books, it can be understood that the labs are being used only by designers. I did it for myself. Hey, great experiment. No, my students come and do it. But the concept of remote lab promotes the sharing of remote experiments. So why are universities not sharing the resources? Because of policies, because of pedagogy, because of teachers, because of designers, because of technology? What is your opinion?
Great question. So, okay, so I think we have to take a practical look at this. In industry, they call reinventing the wheel. Nobody needs to reinvent the wheel. We already know how it works, and we know that it does work. And I think that I did it for myself means they went right from the ground up and they reinvented the wheel. And I was very against that for my project because I actually wanted to graduate. I used everything that was already there and tried to hook it all together on my own. There were a number of things that I had to do because it didn't exist anywhere else. But I used every tool available to me. I evaluated every tool available to me to see where it might fit in. Because otherwise it would have taken 20 years to get it done. So the first thing is, I think there's a natural tendency to want to build something fancy. I think engineers are famous for trying to make something more complicated. And I think the engineering principle of keeping it simple works, because then you finish and you get things done. So first of all, I would caution against it. Don't make anything that already exists. Use what's already there and build on it. So you can start from the ground up and take forever, or you can start from a platform of software or hardware that is already available for your use. Now, why isn't it happening more? I'll go back to how did I spend all my time? It's talking to people. I think one-on-one, small groups, you have to win everybody over one person at a time. So is it because of policies? Maybe, then you have to change the policies. Is it because of how people teach? Maybe, then you need to discover new ways to teach. And then, again, designers are going to always, an engineer is always going to want to make the most complicated thing possible. That's just the way we're built. We want something fancier. But I think that it's harder to force yourself to build on top of other people's work. Why? You have to understand other people's work. And you have to invest that kind of time in order to build upon it. So you have to thoroughly understand as much as available, and then you have to create on top of that. It's too easy, I think it's weak, to try and redo the same things over and over again. So, and I'm sorry if I didn't say that. What's that?
Anyone? Question? No? Next one.
Oh, I see. There's 4 of 6. Okay.
Yes.
I got it.
This is from Teresa Rescue. The internet changed the way of reading and thinking deeply. We use the internet to listen to music, to watch movies, to find many diversified information, to learn and to teach, to read ebooks and to buy. Why writing a paper's book about remote and digital labs?
will be an e-book much more convenient? Why people write paper books in this topic? Who wrote this question?
One of the authors of the paper.
Isn't it much more attractive to get direct access to remote and virtual downloads and to get additional multimedia material for better illustrating those contents?
Okay, this is a fun question. I'm very attracted to paper. I could have brought a laptop, but I like paper. I like to hold paper, and I think we just have to, again, be as versatile as possible. So I didn't have my laptop. I had to work on paper, and I think that having the books in hardcover is very valuable because you can ask the editors to sign them and refer to them. And also having it available online because you go, oh, I can't remember. Like I said, I thought somebody in one of the classes said something about dropping an apple and that being one of the earliest laboratories. And look at the great, foundation that built. So, but I can't remember which one. Oh, I can check it out on the internet and find out. So you can get your precise citation information immediately at your fingertips if you need to. So I think the diversity of information is good and important. I think it would be a sad thing if books went away, and I have friends who read books on their devices. I wouldn't touch that, but they like it. So everyone is different. Everybody learns in a different way. I think that the internet gives us a lot of opportunity for serendipity. I find things I wasn't expecting to find all the time. Whereas a book has got that sequential notion to it, and you've got a tactile feel to it. So I say they both have value. Things that we don't even know about are also going to have value, and I don't think that they're necessarily going to take the place of anything that precedes it. So I say everything has its own intrinsic value, and some things we won't even know what that is yet. Follow up?
I think so.
Oh,
So I wrote the chapter as well.
So that's why we offered a book. Every participant, they have way to carry on playing. Now, question from Ingvar Gustafsson. As I understand it, experimenting could be compared to conversation with nature. Experimenter asks and nature answers. The tricky thing is formulating a useful question and above all interpreting the answer. The only way to learn the language of nature is performing many experiments in laboratories that can be hands-on or remote. Do you agree?
Yeah, this is a great question. So, because, okay, I think I said that, my first lab experience was with biology, and that's what I tried to abstract from. And if you remember, I had that dead end of the sense of smell. And see, to me, in biology, that might be a very useful abstraction. In computer science and control engineering, it's probably not that useful. So I think that, again, there's like this huge diversity of information to learn from. And that conversation with the experiment is very important. There may be subtleties that you don't see the first time. That's why we repeat experiments to see if we get the same outcomes. And so I think it is an important dialogue, and that what we're really doing is we're slicing and dicing it different. In one sense, you may be doing an experiment to try to figure out what the experiment really ought to be. So you run into a lot of dead ends initially, and you wouldn't know that unless you could quickly redo the experiments. You have to be there in person to do that. I've set it up this way, I run it, I don't get any useful information, I'll set it up a different way, I'll run it again. You have to be able to do that in quick succession, and that is a dialogue. So yeah, I agree, that's great.
Any questions from the audience? No? So final question also from Ingvar. It's a long question. I have heard that from superiors, that it may be true that the laboratory resources and instruction per student at universities have been reduced during the last decade.
However, they are that the number of simulations which is shipped has increased more, and that the fraction of engineers produced today that need to be fluent in the language of nature is small. Most engineers, at least in Sweden, will not any longer encounter physics phenomena in their professional life. Software engineering will prevail, and a minor number of specialists will handle the interface to the physical world. Furthermore, superiors, including many representatives of founding organizations, say that the receivers have not complained. Okay. I argue that most engineers of today need a considerable laboratory experience in order to understand what is required to create and to maintain useful products for a sustainable society. Lately, I have gladly noticed a change of attitude among decision makers towards physical experiments in engineering education. Please come.
Okay, this is a very important question, and first of all, I would get the superiors to do a few experiments and see what they think of doing it with the physical world and doing it versus simulation. The simulation is limited by definition. You can only go so far with it. It's good to get the big gotchas out of the way. It's cheap, and that's great, but fundamentally, you have to do it in the real world because that's where we live. So, I would have the superiors check out a real experiment. I would do demonstrations for them. I always, as part of my project, because like I say, one of the things I was doing was educating people as to what I was trying to do, is I always had a demonstration set up. I could do a demonstration at the drop of a hat of whatever level I was at. I was always ready because I would make that offer when I was talking to my administrative superiors. I would say, hey, drop by the lab. I'll show you what's going on, or turn on your computer. We'll do it right here. So I can demonstrate immediately, because I think that on an intellectual level, they can hear things, but they don't really understand them. Just like I can tell you how to add, but until I add myself, or until you add yourself, you're not going to really get the concept. You have to actually do it. And so I think that again, the administrators need to be convinced. So one of the discussions we've had offline about the attractive part about remote experiments is a savings in cost. And I think that school administrators are very keen to the whole idea of savings. And I think it only goes so far. And at the basic level, you want to have people that are competent engineers. And they're not going to get that way if all they have is simulation. So if the end product are successful engineers, successful products, successful economies based on those products, then people have to have real skills. You can't have pretend skills.
Probably one comment from a physicist. Physics progresses because something unexpected happens. In simulations, all things are expected.
Right.
So that's the reason why we need labs.
In a simulation, it's a bounded universe. And in our real universe, it is unbounded. Great comment.
Any more questions from the audience? Okay.
Carisa, you have done your work together with Versinacta and supervised by Molly Sharp, and you were actually keen in showing that you have done a lot of work. You interviewed lab janitors, you talked to a lot of people. You were a really busy student going around. So I prepared a surprise for you.
Okay.
Sorry.
I know where the door is. Okay.
This is for you, from your ex-supervisor, and it's a poem. I see, you can find the meaning there. When Molly says, sorry, scan program review, she's meaning all the work you have done. Very deep. And this is for you.
Great. That's fun.
So
It's a haiku.
I ask you all to join me